why are there so many condos available for rent in Toronto right now? That's the question I'm going to be answering in today's video. My name is John Pasalis from Realosophy Realty. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel to get all the latest updates on Toronto's housing market. So anyone who's looking at renting a condo downtown right now is probably noticing two things. There are a lot of units for rent and prices keep falling. Last month in September, there were just under 12,000 condominium apartments available for lease in the GTA compared to just 3,332 last year. And all of this additional inventory is putting a lot of downward pressure on prices. Average rents in the GTA were down 12% compared to last year. If we look at the city of Toronto downtown, they're down 16% over last year. So the question I've been getting a lot from people, of course, is where is all of this condo inventory coming from? Why are there so many condos available for lease this year compared to last year? Is it because of a decline in demand and maybe fewer people coming to Toronto, fewer immigrants? Is it because a lot of condos have been completed? Or is it because Airbnb units are converting to long-term rentals? These are, of course, difficult questions to answer, but I think trying to develop some insight into the trends behind our market is really important if we want to make more sense of what's going on in the dynamics of Toronto's housing market right now. So when we look at the demand side, there are no perfect measures of demand. The most common metric is looking at the number of units that were leased. And when we look at that, there's actually 5% more condos that were leased in the first 9 months of this year compared to the first 9 months of 2019. So it doesn't look like on the surface that it's a demand problem. It looks like all of this supply somehow is coming on the market, and we want to try to make sense of where this supply is coming from. So to do that, we're going to do a little bit of data analysis, or I'm going to be doing a little data analysis and walk you through what I did and how I tried to come up with some of these estimates of where this supply is coming from. So to start, when we look at the first 3 quarters of 2020, so that's January to September, there were 46,193 unique condominium apartments listed for lease this year compared to just over 32,000 last year. So that's a 13,458 unit increase in the number of rental listings from this year to last year. Now, to make sense of where all this inventory is coming from, we have to basically go back and analyze every individual listing and every individual transaction to kind of make sense of what's going on and where these units are coming from. And what we're going to do is categorize each one into one of 5 categories. So the first category we're going to look at is what we call furnished rentals. And this is basically looking at all of the units that are being listed for lease right now that are being advertised as being furnished. Now, in the city of Toronto, and the GTA, I should say in general, most units that are listed for lease for at least a year are generally unfurnished. So furnished rentals are probably a good measure of units that were probably formerly Airbnbs or listed as short-term rentals that are coming onto the MLS. Historically, furnished rentals on the MLS would be for short terms between 1 and 6 months, but we've been finding in the past year, and likely partly because of the decline in the demand for short-term rentals, that a lot of these units that are coming on the MLS as furnished rentals are actually being marketed for 1-year leases. So they're not short-term rentals, they're just being advertised as furnished rentals for a 1-year lease. So we're going to look at sort of the change in the number of furnished rentals from 1 year to the next to get an idea of how many of these properties are coming on the market. Now, the other 4 categories, what we're basically going to do is take every individual unit that was listed for lease and go back in time and take a look first at what was the last transaction on that property. Was the last transaction a lease or was it a sale? When did that occur? And then on top of that, we're going to look at when the particular building was built as well. So what happens now is we're going to have 4 additional categories. The first one basically looks back and says, okay, if the last time this unit was transacted on the MLS was a lease, then we're going to call this an existing rental. This is a unit that was occupied by a tenant. The tenant just gave notice and decided to move out for whatever reason. So that we call an existing rental. The next category basically is what we're calling a new building. So if this unit that was listed for lease was in a building that was completed in the past 12 months, we're basically saying it's in a new building. The next category, the 4th one, is what we're calling investor purchase. So if the last transaction on this property was a sale in the past 12 months. So if this unit is listed, say this month, and the last transaction before this was in the previous 12 months, it was purchased, we're basically saying this unit was likely purchased by an investor and they've just decided to list the unit for rent as an income property, as a lot of investors do. So that category we're calling investor purchased. And then the last category, we're basically saying if the last transaction was a sale, but it was more than a year ago, or if we have no transaction history, maybe the person bought it pre-construction and moved into it, but the unit's older than 1 year, then these are basically what we're calling previously owner-occupied units. This basically represents a lot of times when condo owners move out of their units, they'll hold on to them as income properties, even though they're going to move into another home. So this is basically a rental supply that's coming on the market from units that were likely previously owner-occupied. Now, one thing that's important to keep in mind with all of these categories is that they're of course rough estimates. I mean, we don't know exactly how everyone is using their units. We're basically using this data to try to categorize units as best we can to try to make some sense of what's going on in the market. They're not absolute rules, but just more of a rough guideline. Now, when we look at our results, and when we compare sort of the source of where all these listings were coming from in 2020 or 2019, you know, we see the following chart with 2019 metrics in blue and 2020 in gray. And this basically shows the change in the source of rental listings from 1 year to the next. But I think to kind of simplify sort of what these numbers are showing, we're basically now just going to take the difference. We're going to say how many units we're in this category in 2020, we're going to subtract 2019. We're saying, okay, what's the change in the source of rental listings for each category? And that kind of shows us this next chart. And we kind of see the big spike in the number of supply is coming from units that were existing rentals followed by furnished units. So let's kind of dig into the data a little bit to kind of walk you through what these numbers mean. So when we look at the number of furnished units, they were up by 2,686 more furnished rentals this year compared to last year. That accounted for about 20% of the additional rental supply that came on the market this year compared to last year. So again, this is probably a good measure of Airbnb impacts or decline in Airbnb short-term rentals, these units coming onto the long-term rental market, but as furnished rentals. So that's one good measure of looking at sort of how that market is impacted. But the majority of our increase, interestingly enough, 55% of the increase in the number of listings this year compared to last year are units that were previously tenanted, and the tenant has just given notice and decided to move out of their unit. Now, why is this up significantly? There are probably a lot of different factors. Number one, we do know that tenants were disproportionately impacted by the slowdown in our economy. A lot of people who are working downtown in the entertainment industry and the hospitality industry may have lost their jobs completely. So it's of course tough to keep a unit that you're paying, say $2,000 a month in rent on if you don't have a job. So we did see a lot of job losses in those sectors. Probably a lot of those people moved out of their units to find more affordable options. In some cases, moving home with family, which a lot of people tends to do, younger people during recessions. Now, the move back home is not even just among people who've lost their jobs. We're finding that, you know, a lot of people now who can work from home are moving back home with family just to save money because there's no need for them now to live in their downtown condo. A lot of the people who moved there did so because it would save on their commute. They have sort of the downtown amenities and lifestyle. Well, they're no longer commuting, and a lot of the sort of the downtown restaurants and nightlife are closed. So there's no reason for them to be spending $2,000 a month in rent. They're just moving back home, saving a little bit of money and taking that route. And then of course, the other consideration is that there are people who are just deciding to move out of very dense buildings in favor of moving to smaller rentals or low-rise rentals. Interestingly enough, we're finding that the rental market for homes like detached, semi-detached duplexes or triplexes is still competitive. Prices have not fallen in that market. And again, that could just be, again, that there's strong demand in lower rise buildings. Now, one important consideration, of course, with the increase in rental listings from people who are moving out of their units, this is not new supply. So it's not new supply in the way that a new building is new supply. This is effectively like a decline in demand for downtown rentals from people who are already living in them. And again, this decline in demand is, again, partly driven by COVID, partly because of the recessionary effects that COVID has brought on and the job losses. So that's one important thing to keep in mind, that even though lease transactions are the same volume as last year, we are kind of seeing a decline in demand because of a lot of these vacancies are driven by tenants just basically moving out of their units. Now, when we look at the other three categories, new condo completions accounted for 11% of the increase compared to last year. There was a 1% decline that was driven by recently purchased investment properties. And then 14% of the increase was driven by homeowners who previously likely occupied their units and decided to list their units for lease. Now, what all of this kind of data probably tells us is that we're not quite out of the woods yet. I mean, when we look at the key factors that are driving this increase, and the two biggest ones being people moving out of their units and Airbnbs being converted to long-term rentals, those trends will probably continue, you know, until working from home slows down, until the sort of the nightlife in the city and the restaurants open up again. We're probably not going to see a rush back down into condo rentals anytime soon. We're probably going to see these trends of people gradually moving out of them, which again is going to probably add a little bit more supply into the market. And then similarly on the Airbnb side, the City of Toronto has just recently introduced their Airbnb registry. So all these Airbnbs will have to be registered with the City of Toronto by the end of this year. They can only rent them out, their principal residents, for up to 6 months out of the year. So again, this is probably going to lead to more Airbnb units likely hitting the long-term rental market, which again, all things considered, is effectively going to add more supply to the downtown market. So how this is going to impact our market, again, has a lot to do with the investors that own these units. I mean, if these investors are well financed and can hold on to the units and can manage a long vacancy period and a decline in rents, you know, we might not see a very big impact on condo prices. If they're overstretched, they can't handle their unit being vacant for 3 or 4 months, or they can't handle a steep decline in rent, then we're going to see probably way more units hit the market for sale, which might put more downward pressure on condo prices if that does happen. So again, we'll be keeping an eye on all of these trends as the market evolves to see what's going on in the condo market, how the rental market's impacting the resale market, because they're all very connected. If you have any questions, anything doesn't make sense, please post a comment below or shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com.